record. Okay. Okay, great. So I'd like to introduce our final speaker for our conference, Dr. Wade Kelly, who is a PhD Executive Advisor on Research Impact at Trobe University. Dr. Kelly is an in-demand speaker on a variety of topics, including engagement with academia and industry and impact in higher education. He has been invited to speak at various international conferences, and we're very excited to have him speak at our conference today. Just one other thing, we will have 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. So please feel free to post your questions either in this chat or in our Discord channel in the relevant subheadings. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Dr. Kelly.
Thank you so much, Tamkin. I really appreciate that you invited me to this conference today. It is really something that is close to my heart that I find is really, really important and often overlooked, particularly with PhD students. And we can talk about why that might be. But part of it, at least part of it, is because of disciplinary norms and the ways that different disciplines have established their ways of communicating and existing, and of what they prioritize, of what is valued. And in higher ed right now, that's changing quite rapidly. And so I'm delighted that those of you who have stayed this long into the conference. I know that the Fridays are always a challenge, and if you're like me, we're in Melbourne and under our 5th lockdown as of midnight last night, that you are just looking forward to the end of the week. But stay in there just a few more minutes and we'll get through this. And so the conversation in higher ed is changing around the value of research, research impact, the kinds of engagements that are happening. But often PhD students don't get experience with any of that space because a lot of pressure has been put on students to be producing publications. So I'm going to keep the chat open in Zoom here, and I would love for you to chat with me throughout the talk. There's questions at the end as well, but I'm happy to keep an eye on that if you've got things that you want to address as we go through. Now, I'm going to cover quite a bit in the half hour that I have, or 25 minutes that I have. And we're going to start with this, because I think this is something we forget to think about. Why do we do what we do? What is the social contract between society and researchers, between universities and researchers, between what you do and the people out there who understand nothing of what you do, who don't know what vesicles are, right? So what should we be doing? What are we supposed to be doing? What do we owe society? Is working in the lab sufficient? Is putting publications out sufficient? Is that the job? Is that making good on the contract that we have as researchers between society and universities or institutions, research institutions? So if nothing else, I'd love you to take some time to think about this, because particularly in disciplines like yours, this kind of question doesn't get given a lot of time or thought. In other disciplines like social sciences, this is a question that is core, that is central to all the activities in that discipline. So for example, in sociology, this is central to the existence of the whole discipline. Why does that discipline exist, and how does that interact with folks in the real world? We'll put it that way. This is a quote from one of my research participants. I don't know if it's arrogance or not, but I actually think some of what I do is kind of interesting, and I want to be able to share it. I don't want to, have it sit somewhere. I don't want to have the thesis that only 3 people read, which is roughly what on average a thesis is read by, which makes no one happy, I'm sure. But so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the engagement and impact agenda that's happening across higher ed. In the chat, if you wouldn't mind, in the Zoom chat rather than the Discord chat, if you wouldn't mind just putting in there what country you're coming to me from today. I'm in Australia, in Melbourne, Australia. It's 1:26 p.m. here on a Friday. And if you could just pop in the chat where you're coming to me from, that'd be really great, so I can get a sense of the various different countries. So we've got a couple of you in Australia, Slovakia, oh, that's fun, European Union, Tehran, Japan, No one from Singapore? Okay, so this will be largely focused in the Australian context. Most of you are in Australia, but this is happening in lots of places, including the UK, Canada, the US. I'm not terribly familiar with what's happening in Japan, but I assume it's similar because this is happening across higher education. So research is what you're most concerned during a PhD. You're on the blue line there. And sometimes at the end of that process, or maybe during the research process, impact occurs. And impact is a change that is made in society, a contribution from your research that creates change out there in the world, be it in industry, in health, in the economy, possibly in other knowledge domains. So the impact you make on other researchers. And throughout all of that process is engagement. So there's academic engagement and non-academic engagement. And all of the people who are in this room today and who have participated in this conference are engaging in an engagement activity, right? You are doing knowledge sharing with your peers. And that's, particularly in academic conferences, that's an accepted way of communicating internally within a discipline. I'm going to talk about mostly external engagement, though, for the rest of this talk. So this is a model that was proposed in 1990, 1996, you kind of revised it a little bit. And the idea is that community engagement activity touches on all aspects of what you do: teaching, research, and service. You're an academic in the center. That's the job of an academic: teaching, research, and service. So somewhere between academia and the community is where community engagement intersects. This is a document that's pulled from my university in Melbourne called La Trobe University. And on the second paragraph, I've just highlighted this expectation of our academics. It says, we recognize that not all research has a direct, immediate, or demonstrable impact in the community or on industry. However, we do expect La Trobe academics will be engaged researchers. So we expect La Trobe academics will be actively engaged in promoting awareness of the results of our research to the community and industry, and be actively engaged in ensuring that our research will be translated so that it can be applied to practice by those who benefit from it. So there's a lot of questions that are tied up in this. Who is going to benefit from your research, which means who are your stakeholders? Who are your potential stakeholders? In your case, it might be other researchers. It might be industry, potentially down the road somewhere, health. And so this is a little logic model for you that to get to impact, engagement is critical. If you have impact, impact is key to getting grants. Grants are key to getting publications. Pubs and grants are keys to an academic career. So engagement is key to an academic career. And engagement takes all kinds of forms. The committee asked me to come talk a little bit about science communication, which is often what it's called in your kind of disciplinary world. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of my experience in science communication. I'm going to hopefully give you some skills, get your brain thinking about ways that you can start to envision this practice. And then I'm going to try and give you some rationale of why I think it's important and why I think you should think it's important too. So the problem is that there's an engagement skill deficit. Most researchers are not being encouraged during the PhD to do engagement work. They're encouraged to be doing the research that's contained within the thesis. Those of you who have shown up today, congrats, pat yourself on the back. You're doing some level of engagement, at least within the academic community. That's awesome. And you're working up against something called the Sagan effect, particularly in sciences like yours, which is the Sagan effect is the perception that popular, visible scientists are worse academics than those scientists who do not engage in public discourse. So working against that, what does that look like? I argue that this is changing very rapidly, but just the other day I saw someone begging Dr. Norman Swan in Australia because he hasn't produced a paper in a number of years. So you're still pushing back against that. But there's this other side, like I said, with the impact agenda that is saying you need to get better at engagement so you can generate impact. I like this. I saw this on Twitter one day and I thought it was really good. You all have imposter syndrome over shit you're actually good at, but confidently put proficient in Excel on your resume. And my point of putting this here, and it is, I always use this slide for PhD talks, is that what you're doing is incredible. You have a tremendous amount of skill, and often those skills are downplayed. And so I'm trying to give you some confidence here to say, oh, I actually do know my stuff. And when someone asks me about it, I want to tell them. I want to tell them the interesting things that I do. So the life of a PhD student generally consists of a bunch of other work and the thesis. The thesis is the main thing. Most of you don't have your cameras on, but I'm seeing some eye nods of approval. The life of an academic is these three components. So when you finish your PhD and you're looking for work, being able to say that you have those three components is going to make you much more marketable. And so I'm putting this in here to encourage you to think about a kind of a holistic approach to the PhD, that it's not just your content and methodological expertise, which you're going to get through this experience, doing a thesis, relevant research experience, which you're going to get in the lab, working with your supervisor, publishing. You're going to get hopefully relevant teaching experience. Hopefully, if this is the trajectory that you're expecting, that you'll be doing some teaching in your world. Thank you for the person who put in the chat to listen to me. That's appreciated. As a presenter, there's a few things better than saying listen to me. The bottom right-hand quadrant, though, is the one that often gets marginalized or minimized. So those of you who are on the committee, organizing committee of this conference, make sure that you put this experience on your CV. Make sure you talk to people about if you're doing committee work at your university, if you belong to your professional association, your academic association, if you're helping organize conferences, if you're out there in the community, if you volunteered for a science camp. All of those things are help sell a picture of you and the various skills that you have that are not just limited to your academic knowledge skills, that you know how to communicate to a wide variety of folks. So now I'm going to zero in. That's quite broad. I'm going to zero in a little bit and give you some specific skills. I run an event called Nerd Night. I've been doing it for almost 10 years. I started in 2012 in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and then moved to Australia. I had one in Wagga Wagga, Australia, and then I joined the team in Melbourne. And we like to say it's like Discovery Channel with beer. It's 3 nerdy talks in a pub. It's a lot of fun. If you want to check out some of the talks, we've got a global Nerd Night page because there's 95 Nerd Nights around the world. And you can go take a look. The talks that are on there are already vetted. They're some of our better talks from around the world. And if you want to get a good sense of what a great, I'll say that, I think most of them are pretty great, a great science communication talk for a generalist audience looks like, spend some time on Nerd Night's page. It is not like TED Talks. TED Talks, I like to say, are more inspiration than education. Nothing wrong with TED Talks. They're great. Often they don't have a lot of meat on them. A really great science communication talk still has some meat, right? You're still hoping that the person's leaving the room with some knowledge. So more education than necessarily inspiration. And that's okay, because isn't knowledge inspirational? The question in the chat is, how about community work that's not too science related? Should we include that too on your CV? Yes. In short, if it's showing the diversity of interests that you have, and so say you were a board member for a community organization or a library or something like that, I would absolutely be including that on your resume, on your CV. You can get creative. The headings in CVs are not set. There's no global alliance of CV checkers that's telling you the exact headings that you have to adopt. You can put in whatever headings you want. So, if you want, you can take a look at my website, wadekelly.com, and you can look at my CV and you can see all the different headings I have there. I break up pubs between, peer-reviewed publications, book chapters, but then I've got community events. I've got things like invited talks. I've got, well, whatever. And then at the very end, I also have volunteer activities. So that's that. I think that addresses that question. So back to Nerd Night. I've been doing it for a number of years. This is a shot from last year. You can see no one's wearing masks. We just had a show on Wednesday night, which was very serendipitous because now we're under lockdown. So we fit in a show. Everyone was all masked up in this beautiful room. We get 150 people out. We sell out every show. We've sold out every show for the last 3 years. It's very popular. It's a lot of fun. I've been working on it for a long time. And I can tell you a little bit, my hair was shorter there, the beard was longer, what makes a good talk. So I thought this would be something that would be useful for you as a takeaway. In pretty much any talk, an academic talk like the one I joined at the top of the hour here is certainly a little different, but basically any talk, you can conform to this kind of funnel approach. And I wish more people would. So at the beginning of your talk, you've got the hook. Why am I here? I tried to do that. Wasn't terribly successful today, but telling you that engagement skills are really important, that we don't do a great job of that. The second part was the project. In the case of this talk, the project I'm talking about is Nerd Night. So this is my little narrow thing that I'm giving you a specific exemplar. And then I'm going to branch it out at the end and say, what does it all mean? Why are we talking about that? What's the impact? What's the hook? So the person I worked with for a talk on Wednesday, he was a designer, and he was talking about the importance of empathy in design. And he showed me an advanced presentation, version of the presentation. It was about 40 minutes long. It's twice as long as it needed to be. So we need to cut it a bit. We need to cut a lot, sorry. But he wasn't getting that take-home message of empathy is important to design. So what we restructured the presentation. So he starts out by saying, I'm going to tell you about design, but specifically about why empathy is important for design. And then he talked about 2 different projects he worked on, making sure to keep on talking about why empathy is important for design. And at the end, he brings it out to the bigger world and talks about Dyson vacuums and how they are used empathy in their design to make a better product. So that's a simple example of how you might craft that talk. So that's the first one. I know this is very high level and broad. Hopefully it's good. Above all else, if you get nothing else, bring the passion. There's nothing that will set your audience on fire like passion. At Nerd Night, we have had the most esoteric talks you can imagine. But when the person comes and they've got such a passion for the thing that they're talking about, anything is interesting. We had a retired police officer come talk about pocket watches once, and it's one of the best talks I've ever seen because he was in love with pocket watches. The first speaker the other night talked about why we haven't cured cancer yet, and it was a fairly brief overview of different approaches to curing cancer. But she had these keychains, which she actually gave me one because she's so passionate about cell embryos that she carries these keychains with her and she hands them out to people because she wants to talk about cell embryos. She is so passionate about it. It's contagious. You want to listen. You can't not listen. So bring the passion. Now, this is a bit more specific. I take a screenshot of this so I can share it, or you can watch it on YouTube later. These are my suggestions for putting together a good presentation. Write it down first in point form. Don't try and build it in PowerPoint. Building it in PowerPoint almost never works. Use a pen and paper. Sticky notes are great. Speak it out loud once you've got your presentation together. Record yourself. Now, most people don't do this. The few people who I've convinced to do this have told me it works incredibly well, and they are very appreciative. I know people don't like the sound of their own voice, but we all have one of these sitting in our pockets. If you record yourself giving a presentation as you're practicing it, and then you go for a walk and you just listen to it three times. It's a 20-minute talk, hour walk, listen to it 3 times. By the end of that walk, you will know exactly what needs to change, what works, what you're missing. It'll just start to sink in. So that's my suggestion there. Ask yourself these questions. Is it specific to the audience that you're talking to? So if it was for Nerd Night, is it using lay language? Does it flow appropriately? Is there a story? If not, refine, edit, repeat. Present it to someone who's not in your field. Some of the talks that I saw earlier today, those are definitely, you're talking to someone, you're talking to a group of people who are in your own field. No problem. You all speak each other's language. It's all the same kind of jargon within the discipline. No problem. But if you're talking to a different audience, if you're talking to a Rotary Club or perhaps a potential industry partner or a funder, they're not going to know all the words that you know. And you need to make sure that that you remove those or you explain those as you talk. That's challenging. That's really challenging because our language is so ingrained that we don't even know we're using it. We just do it. So that's my challenge to you. When you present it to the person not in your field, say, what do you think was the most important message? What was your takeaway? What will you remember from this talk? And then practice, practice, practice. Now, when it comes to presenting, and this is a challenge, find opportunities to present. This is that engagement stuff that I was talking about. The skills that you learn in doing engagement work, either a public event or a conference like this, are important because they build your ability to communicate complexity in a variety of ways. Each time you do it, you will get better at it. More words doesn't make it better, which I should practice my own because I've got too many words on these slides, I would argue, but this is more instructional, so I'll just give myself a pass. The biggest one, stay to time. Stay to time. If you go 3 minutes under on a talk, no one will be upset. Not a single person has ever been upset, unless it was like, unless you paid a lot of money to see Michelle Obama speak, then maybe if you were 3 minutes under, you'd be a bit upset. But no one has ever been upset at an academic conference or at a public talk when it went a little bit under. But if it goes over, unless you're David Sedaris or some, Neil deGrasse Tyson or something like that, if it goes over, people aren't happy. So it's better to go under. So when I've got these 20-minute talks at Nerd Night and I have somebody email me, go, I'm at 25 minutes. I just need to cut 5 minutes. I go, no, you need to cut 10 minutes. If you plan for 15, you'll go to 18, 19, 20. If you plan for 20, you'll go to 25. So stay to time. I've always got an eye on the clock. I know exactly that it's 1:44 right now, and that I need to talk for around 6 more minutes. Check for understanding. I keep on looking on my left-hand side of the screen because I've got the presentation in a kiosk mode or in a single slide mode, so I can still see faces. I see 3 of you in the room, so still have your monitors on. Thank you so much, because I'm looking for understanding, even if it's the littlest things. And thank you for the smiles. Oh, 4 people are on, yay. Get feedback if you can. That can be a challenge, but in the impact world, if you can ask for feedback after a talk, that'd be really good. Ask your supervisor to attend your talk and give you feedback. Ask your colleagues. Asking for feedback can be difficult. Ask someone to even write feedback as they're watching your presentation. You can get better through iterating your talks. And the reality is that, like this talk I'm giving right now, I've given it before, right? And I get better at it each time because I am thinking about what worked, what didn't, how the flow was. So work on that. If there's one thing that you take away from this talk, aside from I hope that you will engage, is that it's not all about the thesis. That a PhD is not a document. It is not a single bound thing. It is your future. It is a collection of knowledge and experiences and skills and know-how that you bring into the world in your way of being. And so during your PhD, you can take that time to build your engagement skills, to build your communication skills, and they will serve you. I promise you, they will serve you throughout your career. So if you want to do that, what would that look like? You can build yourself an engagement plan. Everything starts with the audience. So thinking about who are your potential stakeholders, your end users, your next users, how might you be able to cultivate those relationships, right? So right now, your audience might be other PhD students. It might be international partners. It might be academics that you really like their research. It might be people in industry or people who are in the public. Maybe that's your audience. Think about the skills that you might need to develop. A lot of researchers have not had a lot of presentation skills to people who aren't exactly like themselves. And so finding those opportunities can be really good, really challenging, but good. Ask yourself what you're doing now, what would you like to do, and how can your supervisors or mentors help? So the things you can do really quickly: develop a multi-year plan of activities. Those should include all of your publication plan, discipline engagement plan, external engagement plan, teaching experience, all of that stuff, to make sure that you're hitting off the things you want to get done during your PhD or your master's or whatever you're at. Ask your supervisor or colleagues for ideas about engagement opportunities. So are there committees that you could be joining, journals you could be reviewing? Are there associations, community groups, industry partners that you could be interfacing with? Join mailing lists. Amazing what mailing lists can do to find out what's going on, to stay abreast of job ads, all that kind of stuff. Develop your personal persona. So a public website, social media profile. Increasingly, as academics, these things are important. It's not about branding. I don't like that term. It's about reputation. And you can use these tools to communicate your reputation. If you can, I really would hope that you've lasted, the 13 you have lasted this long, that you would consider doing this. Find non-academic venues to hone your presentation skills. There are all kinds. There's, Science in the Pub talk series, there's Pint of Science, there's all kinds of things. Given the amount of lockdowns that we've been having, there's online events. I'm going to be presenting at one, well, potentially next week, it might be canceled, called Sci-Fight, which was a science comedy debate where we bring science and we debate a topic. Next week's is, the topic is that my mind should be put into the cloud. I'm arguing in the affirmative. And let me tell you, arguing in a debate style really hones your rhetoric skills. 3-minute thesis and visualize your thesis are really awesome. They offer free training and they allow you the opportunity to be supported and to put yourself out there. And having been judges at 3 different universities for both of those activities, I can tell you that the people who do participate in them often get additional media exposure, and they get put on the radar of those individuals at their institution, and they're known quantities. So then when we need someone to help out, do a presentation for a school group, or we need someone to help out on a committee or put on academic board or something like that, they're a known quantity, and we go, oh, they're really good. Let's go ask that person. So I said the problem was that there's a lack or a deficit of skills. The solution is to build those skills. And I really hope you consider that, think about opportunities. You can schedule them out like this, put them in talk about your activity, your stakeholders, your audience, the skills required, the things you want to do, put it in your timeline. The last thing in the last minute or so is my challenge to you. And that is when somebody asks about your research, connect with them. A lot of PhD students go, oh, it's this is a really complex thing. I'll talk about it. And a lot of people are very happy to hear, because they go, PhD, oh, vesicles, oh, that's how's the weather? Instead, take this opportunity to challenge yourself, to really try and convince them that what you're doing matters. Every time someone asks you about your research, you get better at describing it. You refine that pitch each time. And eventually, when the eyes aren't glazing over and people go, oh, that's neat, then you're there, then you've got them. Because that skill of being able to pitch to that one individual in the supermarket line is the same skill that's going to be required some point down your career road when you're talking with an industry partner, or when you're talking with a minister, or when you're talking with the dean and the head of your faculty. Those skills do matter. Most people who read grants are not experts in your area, the really big grants, they're experts in their area. So they're called the College of Experts. They're experts in their area, not your area. They'll know something about your area, but if you don't have the skills to be able to describe what you do, why you do it, and why it matters, you won't be able to attract a great deal of funding. So these are skills that everyone needs. And unfortunately, a lot of programs don't bake in these skills and encourage these skills. So be daring, you've got it. I'm here to support you. If you're on Twitter, join me on Twitter. And again, not all about the thesis, it's your PhD, it's your future, it's not a document. And at that moment, 1 minute over time, but we've got 9 minutes for questions. So I'll start with Sarah right there saying, do we really have to have super great communication skills? How about to be a real nerd sometimes? Yeah. What about being an introvert? Well, my supervisor for my PhD says she's an introvert, and she said that she's, the first academic conference she ever went to was just overwhelming for her. It was so overwhelming, so challenging. But she realized that in order to make it work, she was going to have to fake it until she makes it. And that's what the phrase she used, fake it till you make it. And that she has to pretend to be an extrovert sometimes, and that she had to build some of these skills because they are often required. If you want to be in a lab and not progressing in your career, then you probably don't need these communication skills. But communication skills, both verbal and written, are critical for grant success, for communicating your research, for articulating the value of the work that you're doing. In higher ed right now, things are increasingly precarious. And if you can't justify why the area you are in matters, you're at a disadvantage to others. So hopefully that answers your question. I think it's introverts are important. Introverts are awesome. Being introverted doesn't mean that you can't communicate in a variety of ways. You find your comfort level in that space. And so maybe it's more comfortable for you to be writing, communicating via written text. And so thinking about, as a starting point, where are some places that you could be doing public communication through written mediums, right? Maybe there's a professional association newsletter or something like that. I'm going to open it up. I see one more comment here. Great advice. I spent 3 hours last night helping my partner cut 10 minutes from his overly long first ever conference presentation. Ooh, that's exciting. Yeah. There's I forget who the quote's often attributed to Mark Twain, but it wasn't him. He said, I wanted to write you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so you'll have to accept this long one. Sometimes getting things to be short and concise is much more difficult than long. The conference organizers approached me and said that I had 30 minutes to talk. That is much better than 5 minutes for me, because 5 minutes is a real challenge. Are there other questions out there? I'll open up the microphone to anybody else who'd like to ask anything.
I actually have a question. I was just typing it, but I thought it might be too late before it stopped. So thanks for such a great talk. It's very engaging, and it's very helpful to know. Sometimes we get so caught up in our research and PhD bubble that we forget some of the other skills. So if we do want to sort of expand after the PhD, go into, say, other research areas or even the industry, how can we convince that we're not just about a research, that we have the other skills, that we have much more to offer than just, research lab experience? But how can we showcase some of the other skills we've learned by doing a PhD?
Oh, that's a good question. I see, Cherie, is that, are you an academic appointment?
Yeah.
Do you want to answer that question as well? Because I feel like we're both going to have some thoughts.
I think for a CV, the headings is really clear, but don't be shy to put weird things on there. So non-traditional media is something I see a lot of now. And yeah, going out and I just agree with everything Wade said. I'm sorry, it's just it was just like yep. And don't be shy to ask your supervisors to look at their CVs. You'll be able to see that these guys have got there. You hope they've got there, and so don't be shy to see how they're presenting themselves. Also, young faculty members, I think they're a little bit more open-minded about how they present themselves, and so they'll give some great advice as well.
Yeah, higher ed is changing very rapidly. Like I study higher ed, so I can say that with some authority. It's changing very rapidly, and the ways of doing and being are no longer what they were 20 years ago. But some of the people who are in academic roles, particularly at senior research leaders, are still able to live in that world because that world is established, and often they are just communicating to their students how they went through the process, and that can disadvantage students. Also, there's some good research around how supervisors protect students. They go, oh no, don't do too much teaching, and don't do too much this, that, and the other thing. You got to focus on the thesis. But actually, they're disadvantaging students in some cases because they're not being exposed to those things, and those things will make you more competitive. The classic example for me is committee work. You know, we always struggle, because I'm in university administration, we always struggle to get students on academic committees, and usually in most terms of reference have a spot for a PhD student, and often it goes unfilled. But if you can put that on your CV and you understand how meetings work, and you understand how to even just read an agenda, that's a skill. And when I look at somebody's CV and I can see that they've got some committee work, even if it's just a standing member, they're not even a role, just being present in those spaces tells me that they understand something that I don't have to teach them, or they don't have to learn. I'm going to just post something in the chat, which is a bio from one of our professors, Andy Hill. I did a workshop with, he's the head of the research for the college, with his 10 research directors. And we developed some bios that are intended to be publicly facing. And so this is a good example of, I think, a way that you can show that you know how to communicate by doing something like he's done in this first paragraph. He's a very senior researcher. He's very well connected. And what he's developed there is super approachable. You understand his research. It's somebody on the outside, be it a funder or industry partner or whoever, is able to look at that and go, oh, that's what he does. And most academic bios don't do that. Most academic bios start with a jargon and, you know, basically where his second paragraph starts. So that's a simple way that you can start thinking about that, the way that you're communicating who you are, what you do, what you're interested in. Why should someone care?
Thank you so much. It's really great advice. And everyone, please do make sure to check out that link that just been posted. I think there is another question. I'm not sure if you've answered this, but there's a question from Maimona who asked, asked how about community work that is not science related? Should we include that too?
Yes, absolutely. Unless it's divisive potentially. So if you were working for some political organizations, you might want to be careful, because that could prevent you from biasing you, I guess, by the people who are reading it. So generally, though, yes, absolutely. I think that stuff shows that you're human, that you've got other interests. Absolutely. And like I said, like working for doing volunteer work at the Salvation Army or something like that shows that you have interest and that you know how to work with people, and absolutely, I would include that kind of thing. And Annie, thank you for your comment there. I appreciate that. More universities are doing this, and we don't have anybody from North America here, but in North America, coursework is part of the PhD, in Canada, in the States at least. And these kinds of things are built into coursework. And so people in Australia, which I was shocked when I did my PhD in Australia that this wasn't built in, are at a bit of a disadvantage, because international students are getting this explicit training, right? What the talk I did today is an entire course in Canada, in where I came from, in Edmonton. Now we're at time. So I recognize that we probably have to go. I'm happy to stay for a little bit longer, but I do want to say we're at time, and I said a lot about time.
I was going to say we'll follow advice. We'll follow your advice. I think Annie had a comment too, but we actually have a networking event to follow through, so there'll be a lot of discussions and opportunities to have more intimate discussions there. Just before I move on to that, I'd like to thank you so much once again for a very engaging talk.